So I am Vicky Smith, and I've been working in film for since my degree course, and that was 1988. When I graduated, I started working at the London Filmmakers Co-op. That was in the early 90s, 1990. And I was working there as a workshop organizer. So that felt like, in many ways, just being really plunged right into this world of experimental film, which I didn't really know that much about. So it was really sort of, it almost felt like to be working in experimental film was just kind of became inevitable, really. I don't know. I'm not very good at answering things in linear ways. So maybe you just let me ramble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that all right if I just ramble?
Yeah.
I sort of feel like some people might have clear plans about what they're going to do with their life. 5-year plans, whole life plans. And I never really did. I just have kind of made it up as I've gone along. So I suppose I didn't plan on being part of a world of experimental film, and that's just where I've wound up. Anyway, so after working at the Film Co-op for a few years, and then I don't know if you know the history of London Filmmakers Co-op, but they it sort of changed and became Lux, which is now Lux Moving Image. But I was involved in it before that change, and then at some point, about 10 years ago, I actually left London and moved to Bristol, which is where I am now, and was a co-founder of Beef, Bristol Experimental Expanded Film. So that's the sort of worlds that I've inhabited. So that's my intro.
And could you share a little bit about, because you also mentioned you don't plan the life, and then the life sometimes just happen for you, and happen for you that you were in this experimental film world, and you start to make experimental films. And I was wondering, how do you what is experimental film for you in your personal perspective for you?
Again, this has clarified over the years. I think when I was younger, I was in this world because I, during my degree course, Guy Sherwin was my tutor, and he was the one who got me excited about working with film. I used to be a painter, and Guy asked me if I wanted to join the filmmaking course, and I said no, it's too technical. And he said, no, this one won't be. It's just drawing straight onto film workshop. So I thought I'll give it a go, mainly because I just liked Guy. I thought he was a nice person. And so I went on this course, and we were just marking straight onto film in the beginning. And then in the afternoon, we projected it. And it was upon the projection that's when I realized that that's what I wanted to do, because the transformation for me sort of became, I saw the possibilities of painting in motion, because up until that point I'd sort of been painting static pictures, and they had, I'd sort of had issue, couldn't somehow resolve compositional issues. But when these films that we just made basic marks on in the morning and then projected them, it's like by putting them into the dimension of time, it solved some of the issues of the spatial problems, because obviously with a drawing straight onto film, there's not space to do complex compositions. It's almost like what you lose in space, you gain in time. And anyway, so not to drift too far, Guy used to bring people into my degree course that I was interested in what they did, but I also hadn't quite managed to move away from this notion of film as narrative or cinema. So we had people like Annabelle Nicholson, John Smith, George Saxon. They all were visiting lecturers. And I suppose just because they seemed more, less hierarchical than many of the painting tutors, we sort of all went to the pub together. So there was a sort of friendliness and not a, and so I felt like that was my culture. But on the other hand, I didn't really understand this sort of rejection of all the things that are proper to cinema. And that's really only come as I've got older, if I'm honest with you. When I started doing my PhD, then, it was during my MA. So sort of groundbreaking moment was a screening of Wavelength. And I think just because we were in this dedicated environment, and with lots of interesting people, and I somehow found the ability to focus in a way that I hadn't before. And it suddenly was a light on moment, like, yes, I understood that the things that ordinarily have the most significance in a film, such as a murder, in this instance were background, and the main importance was the zoom, so the camera operation. And then with that sort of realization also came the sense that I noticed myself perceiving. So that's our perception. I think it was almost like an avalanche. Once a thing you become aware of noticing something, you can't then stop being aware. So that became quite empowering, that moment, because I had just had a leap in understanding about that the film was about promoting one's self-awareness and ability to perceive and predict and contextualize as well, because I realized that it was very eloquent of factors of perspective. Anyway, so that was, and then I've gone on since then to more get a more of a sort of sense of experimental film having less to there's less that's arbitrary. And by the time I sort of started my PhD, I got a sense of like, yes, it's very much about establishing rules. Because my earlier work, I'd felt that was more expressionistic. I sort of called it experimental, but in truth, I feel like it was probably more allied to the US avant-garde. And I would make a distinction in this sense, in some ways, that the sort of experimental film might be more European, and that avant-garde I would associate broadly with the US. So I know these are hard distinctions, and there's obviously a lot of overlap. But I feel that my earlier work was probably more lyrical, more like diary, more visionary even. I would ally it more with that. And as I've gone over time, I've just found more and more a preference for systems and for everything that needs to be said arises out of the process and the materials. There's not anything left over or spare or extraneous.
I have like a two questions about the same time. I think one was because your background sounds like you were painting, and then from that opportunity you start to draw on the film, and that's how you start working with the film. But I think you also have a lot of film are more animated imagery, and I was wondering, was because the starting point like that, or maybe could you tell something about what make you like so much about animated imagery? Maybe we start with this.
It's not so much that I have a preference for animated imagery. It did lead on from the painting. It's like a bridge. I see it. It's something that combines drawing and painting with photography. So by doing painterly animated types of things, it allows me to keep on having a relationship to paint and also film. So that was the starting point. I think of somebody like Maria Lasnik, for example, who crossed the Austrian filmmaker, she's dead now. She did crossover between painting, animation, and live action. And I sort of feel like here's another reason, which is that I suppose it sort of goes back to ideas of realism with the photograph, with the photographic. It feels like, for me, painting was something that took time. Took a lot of time. I would paint in layers. You paint, you wait, you let it dry. So it's a long, slow process. And whereas filmmaking or the photographic is just instant, and I couldn't relate to it being instant. I needed it to be something which occurred over time. And it felt like photography or just filming through a camera felt too quick and easy. And somehow I needed things to involve more effort. So that's another reason why the early work was animation.
because you were talking about that filming or other way of capturing imagery, it feels a bit like a too instant. So you miss that kind of effort. You feel you need a little bit more effort, more time to let things happen, I guess, or let imagery being created. And then I was also very curious your relationship with the film medium, because it seems a lot of your work you have a different personal connection with the medium itself.
Again, that has changed over time. Maybe I'll just talk about the more recent stuff that I'm doing. When I say recent, maybe since I started my PhD. So we're talking about 2010. And at that point, because it was an inquiry, I approached the filmmaking practice more as in terms of research, which again I feel is comes closer to the type of motives of the London Filmmakers Co-op type of people, or the European, the questioning, interrogation of the apparatus as being something really uppermost in the inquiry. The change in the status of analog film. So, in the sense that analog started to be displaced by the digital. And actually, for my PhD, the question, the title was, or part of the inquiry was how to make film. There was the genre of handmade film, and what I wanted to do was to make the film with other parts of the body. Yes, I was saying that I realised that a lot of people used. There was the genre of the handmade film, and that what I was interested in was the possibility of making films like that, but by using my whole body. That then produced, from that I produced Noisy Licking, Dribbling and Spitting, and that really had rules. But that was made by, I really had a system for that. Also, that ended up leading into performance, because I was aware of the sort of performative nature of it. The way I made it felt really like I was action painting. And in some ways, I sort of saw it as action painting, and almost like a parody of action painting, because the film strip itself is just 16 mil. So I was thinking about the system that I used was to use my tongue as though it were a printing tool, and I dyed it with food colour, and then I printed it along the film strip, and I reduced the number of frames by one each time I printed it. So it's this sort of sense that the impression of the tongue gets faster. And then I had all this food colour in my mouth, so then I spat it all out. And then it sort of combined methods of printing with methods of painting. But to go back a little bit, the reason I'd started working very much directly onto the film strip was because of this sort of this narrative of the death of film. So it was a way of working in a very physical way with film, as opposite to the way of making digital images, which I had also been attempting. I taught myself how to do some computer animation in the 90s when it first started to replace other forms of animation. And so I did learn how to do this, but through doing that, I realized that actually there was no pleasure in making it. And it all just felt like a bit like, well, so what? You know, I can create an object and put a camera and lights on it and make it rotate on this computer screen. But it just felt like I didn't feel motivated by it. It felt senseless. And so in many ways, by having this extremely physical way of working with the film was as a way of saying, well, this is what you can do with film, that you can make images or marks in very immediate, highly physical ways. So that through all of that through that idea, then I also did a whole number of performances and films directly without a camera. So there was some bicycle tire track, 33 frames a foot, noisy licking, dribbling and spitting. Those were the three main ones. And then I did a few more after that. But I sort of see that the work time when there wasn't really much alternative to analog filmmaking. So we're talking about the 90s. Obviously, there was video. I was working with 16mm because of Guy, really. That was the equipment that was available. And so I started off with the 16mm. And then in terms of using animation, there was like for animation, you just put a Bolex on a stand and then lights on either side, and you don't move the camera, you move the artwork or you move the table that it's on. So the camera is always still. But that was how I did most of my early work, was under this Bolex camera, where I just moved the artwork more than the camera. And then the second phase was where I didn't use a camera at all, and instead I was working straight onto the film strip. Now I'm in the third phase where I'm using the camera again.
Well, interesting. You say the three phases. The first phase is you were using the camera being still and you move the object or art you are filming or animating. And the second phase is without camera. And the third phase with the camera again. And I was wondering, now you have a camera again, what was the difference than the first? What's the difference in terms of attitude or idea with the first phase?
Yes, it's very different now. Through the second phase of working directly onto the film, I got I was working with the idea. That's where I started working with my own body. Prior to that, I had created these sort of animated worlds, which I invented from my imagination. So they didn't really relate to, they weren't observational. Whereas in the second phase, I was using my own body as a resource. So it sort of comes from, well, there are other artists who've worked that way, such as Thorsten Fleisch. Jennifer West is another, who were using their own bodily fluids as medium. So then I to carry that on, that idea of working with my own body into working with the camera. So that's the phase that I'm on now. Actually, the film that you would have seen, Not Apart, because that was on at Rotterdam, that one was, again, a sort of, that became another bridge for me. So if you like, the first bridge was finding my way to animation from film, from painting, I mean. That was the first bridge. And then this more recent one was where I found a way back to film, in a way, from direct filmmaking. So I found my way back to the photographic so that would have been 2019. And the reason that became possible for me was because I became part of Beef, set up a dark room, and we also got access to this international film lab, artist film labs such as Filmwerkplatz and Baltic Lab, and all these artist-run labs that discovered cathanol. So the discovery of the cathanol made it acceptable for me on my own sort of terms to use film again, like photographic film, because it felt like it was less harmful to the environment. And a lot of the films that I make have themes about pollution. And so it felt like hypocritical to use conventional photography chemicals. But by the discovery of being able to use cathanol, I mean, it still has a toxic element, which is the silver, but it felt less toxic. So I started doing these photograms, which was my way back into the photographic. Made the film Not Apart, which you've seen, and then I made another one out of which grew out of the relationship of the fact that a lot of film artists were using this very slow film stock, PF2, and 3378, which is a sound recording stock. And these were very low ASA, as you probably know. So it's like ASA of about 2 or 4, and that these were required lots of light to expose, to get a good exposure. So that's when I started working around these ideas, needing to, the fact that I needed to overexpose the film to give that a lot of light felt like it was tying in with interests in climate change and the fact that our bodies were getting burnt and receiving too much light. So that drove the idea behind Re-Exposure, which was the film I made after Not Apart. So now to the present, and the use of the camera now. Obviously, with the photogram, you don't have the camera. I've always had a Bolex camera. I've had it, well, for 30 years. But as I said, I used to use it in a way that wasn't really active. It just recorded the movement in front of it. And now I've started doing these performances to the camera. Well, the camera is still static. Somehow I've never really done any handheld camera, but really developed a very close relationship to the camera in terms of listening to it, I suppose, in terms of that when you wind, you give it a full wind, and then you can put an audible click on, so that every is it every second or every foot goes click? I think it is every second, so that by having the camera on a tripod, and then I perform in front of it. And that I take my cue how to perform by listening to the clicks. Also, because I'm really doing lots of rewinds in the camera. So again, it's almost like some of the ideas with re-exposure, where the logic is that with a very slow film stock, you have to you have to give it lots of light. It was almost like then, well, if I can't find enough light, then just give it more passes through the camera. So that's sort of informing where I'm at now, which is just to rewind the film and re-expose it. And if there's not enough light, it doesn't matter. I can re-expose the same piece of film again and again and again. So I've really been pushing that. You know, I was sort of thinking of people like Moderne, Gregory Markopoulos, even Buster Keaton and Méliès, who Buster Keaton multiplied his own image 9 times, and he had himself dancing on stage 9 times. I just thought, well, let's see if I can pass the film through the camera more times. And at one point, I think I might have passed it through 60 times, but then the exposure was really overexposed. This is what I'm experimenting with now. And, you know, the thing is that it's like what I realize is that I've managed to come back to painting in a way by doing this. And I'm thinking what I do now is painting with film, or film as paint. That's how I'm calling it, film as paint, because by repeatedly working on one piece and exposing it to light each time, I think of that as a glaze. It's like the different glazes are building up on one piece of film. And obviously the idea of the glaze comes from painting or from ceramics. So even though I'm not really touching the film, as I did with my cameraless work, there is a sense of tactility because the film is being exposed more. It doesn't just go straight through the camera and into the can. I'm pulling it and pushing it as much as I can in a way.
I think earlier we were discussing what you were sharing your relationship with the film medium, and then you share that you start to use part of your body onto film in a way, like the film you mentioned, the noisy licking, dripping, and the spitting. And now you mentioned this work that you get camera again, but you are using your body in front of the camera that make you more aware of, and then now even the film become as a paint in a way. And then I want to go back a little bit during the time when you were experimenting with the soaping and spitting and scratching. I remember I read somewhere you mentioned you want to explore body as medium, and you have been sharing how your body have been involved during the creation. So my question is, can you say more about this thought about body as medium, and how do you see that with the film medium together?
The body as medium in relation to the film as medium. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question in the way that you mean, but I suppose the idea that analog film is composed of frames and feet, and just thinking about the standardized ways in which analog film is manufactured and spoken about in these standardized ways, 40 frames a foot. And I guess I got somehow, I don't know how I got there, but thinking about the fact that the female body tends to be smaller than the male frame, and that my foot only measured 33 frames, whereas the industry standard foot is 40 frames per foot. And so I guess and then with noisy licking, dribbling, and spitting, my tongue measures 6 or 7 frames, depending on how much I stick it out. So for a while, I was sensitive to these systems, let's say, of what the body, how the physical and the material can find some sort of relationship, I guess. I mean, we've got, like I say, I said earlier that Annabelle Nicholson was an influence when Guy brought her to Wolverhampton, where I did my degree, and her talking about her having bits of film in her home and lengths of film. And she also had a sewing machine in her home. So, she had this sort of sense of how the film fitted in to her domestic environment. And again, that was something I was thinking about, in terms of how a film frame could just fit into the palm of my hand. And that was something I also explored in Not Apart. That was a sort of starting point in a way, was that when we did the research for that, we went to beehives, and the beekeeper was quite fearless of the bees, and he actually had a bee crawling over his hand. And at one point, and I took some photographs of this, and at one point he had a bee directly in the middle of the palm of his hand. And I had some years ago done a drawing of a film frame that sat in the palm of my hand. So this is all part of just thinking about how the film material, to my mind, lends itself to the human body.
And then I also want to ask one more question related to this. Maybe you already touched a little bit earlier, but I thought to ask one more time, like why this body or physical involvement, it is so important and so interesting to you?
I'm interested in presence, I guess. Okay, let's go back to the photographic and realism, and the one of the claims of filmmaking, the ontology of film, is what Andre Bazin was talking about, and that it would be like a long shot, and that the artist, the filmmaker, would not interfere in any way with the shot. They would just set the camera up and let it roll, and all the action would unfold in front of it. And I just, and then that would be the truth. That would be the real, as Bazin saw it. And to my mind, I would more be like Vertov, where I would be more interested in very much authorship, and how by inscribing myself in the frame in different ways, through tactility, through reflexivity, that sense of the authorship and trace, actually, I can't say why that feels more significant to me than taking shots of the world. It feels like, I guess in many ways, like the personal is political. That's how I kind of see what I do. It's like with the current work, I'm appearing in front of the camera, and that's what there is. And in many ways, maybe some people would think that doesn't say enough, but it's, in a way, I feel that there's the possibility of seeing a lot in it, even though there's not much there. It's a portrait. I can use my own body, my own self. It's mine to use. I can't assume that I have the right to film anyone else. So I guess it comes from that. It's the personal that I don't feel like actually there's not enough transparency. You know, there's this artist called Dryden Goodwin, British artist, animator, and I feel like it's almost voyeuristic the way he works. And I've said this to him, you know, he sort of draws people covertly and then animates these drawings. And that feels to me like, well, it feels a bit intrusive. Oh, well, look, I say that, but on the other hand, I'm really interested in the types of things that Warhol did and Marcopolis, where they did just film people, like Warhol screen tests. I find them fascinating. Maybe because they're as much about the limits of the photographic as they are about the character of the sitter, because he imposed so many constraints on them.
Also, you mentioned like the film in a way is capturing this very personal and then authorship connection between yourself and the film medium itself, and there is some kind of possibility there that you want to explore. And then I was wondering, maybe focus on your current situation, your current research, like what would be something you want to explore in filmmaking right now?
Did I not answer that already in terms of I'm thinking of film as paint, almost seeing how much it can hold, how much I can saturate the film with light, but also protecting other parts of the film by not lighting it. Yeah, film as paint. I think that's where I'm going for. And in so doing, I suppose also you might know this author Tess Takahashi, she's written about the role of celluloid film as having a direct indexical relationship to the world. It's sort of touched light. She's written about that, and she's writing something now in Tim Knowles and Jonathan Wally's new book, the Palgrave Handbook of Experimental Film. She's writing about my direct film works, and she's calling the chapter, what does she call it? Disarticulating authorship. Even though she's been writing that about my direct films, the ones made directly without a camera, I sort of feel that that's very much also the case with the pieces that I'm now working on with the camera, because by repeat exposing the face, the figure, which is me, then it depends on whether you watch it in negative or positive, it becomes extremely dark or light. Let's think about the dark version, where the film has recorded my face more than 10 times on one piece of film. And because I can't stand exactly still, I try to take on the exact same position for each pass of the film. But inevitably, there's a tiny bit of movement between each pose. So you get the impression that the film is out of focus, but then you realize as the film goes along that it's not that it was soft focus, but that it was each layer is in focus. But because there are so many layers, the sense of soft focus comes through space because the layers are stacked up spatially. So it exists in the dimension of time and space. is another reason why it becomes film as paint, because it's a spatial experience. Even though you can't see all the layers all at once, they peel off, and then you become aware that, in fact, it's like a palimpsest. In some of these, where the head seems very black and soft at the edges because of it being multi-layered, it looks like charcoal. It's fuzzy and soft. And again, to go back to Tess Takahashi's notion of disarticulating authorship, these are all sort of intentions of mine in terms of, in some ways, right, here's another theorist, which is Laura Marks, who talks about the haptic image, talks about it in relation to intercultural cinema or something like that. Okay, so the haptic is touching with the eye. And it's the idea that when an image has too much information or too little, the eye needs to touch it because it can't see it from a distance. The haptic image is when you linger over the image. So you look at it for a long time, and in looking at it for a long time, it's like touching, whereas the gaze is more instant. So the haptic gaze is a touching gaze, and it happens when what we see isn't visually clear. And in many ways, again, that's something that I'm interested in. Laura Marks says it in relation to when filmmakers want to protect the subjects that they're filming. They don't necessarily want it to be explicit. So I was saying earlier about Dryden Goodwin and this idea, or Bazin, that everything, it's like it's yours. You can film what you like in the world. You have that entitlement, right? And then you don't stake your own authorship within it. Well, especially with Bazin, it was like, yep, here's the world happening in front of my camera. Whereas I'm the opposite of that, really. And I think more relating to the types of things that Laura Marks is saying, where I feel like whatever I film, I would want to do it in a way that is defamiliarized because I'm not comfortable with things being explicit. So it's almost like a withdrawal. It's like a withdrawal from the harshness of the gaze as a way of protecting. Even when I have done portraits, I did do a sort of series of portraits of other people during the time of COVID, because there was an opportunity to do this. And I said I was interested in the screen tests, Warhol screen tests, but I filmed them in such a way that I left the image as negative. And then when I processed it, I used very warm temperatures. And that meant the cathanol stained the film. So they're very brown and they're in negative. I filmed at a different frame rate. So the breathing is accelerated and lots of things that you can't actually tell the identity of the people that I'm filming. So I feel like it's sort of relating to the ideas of authorship, but then it's complicating that. Or as Tess Takahashi says, it's disarticulating authorship.
And I also have a couple last questions. One of them was because you have been mentioned a lot of your inspiration or reference, and it seems like there's a lot of things has changed since you did your PhD. And I was wondering, what was the main reason that you decide to do PhD? And I know a lot of things has changed. And is there anything, the major change do you still want to add on since you took that step, and that has influenced the way you work, the one you haven't mentioned yet?
To do because of changes in my personal life. So the personal changes meant that I had space in my life to do these things, to do that. And also because I realized that I could get funding to do it. So it was literally a way of doing my practice and getting money for it. So, yeah, I'm not sure how much I should go into talking about the personal in a way, but it's almost like, I spoke earlier a bit about presence, which I suppose I also sort of mean attention. And it's almost like because of the changes that happened in my life, in my personal circumstances in about 2010, I feel like I sort of I had some loss, some personal loss, and it had a big impact on my well-being. But then I survived that. And I think in surviving it, I became stronger and I've become more aware, more self-aware. And literally that, I think, has allowed me to, it's all been a slow process of just slowing down, being more measured with what I do. More measured, more reflective, more asking more questions, but in a way by doing less.
Could you share what kind of question you normally ask?
Well, one of them is I've touched on this already, which is finding ways of allowing the medium to speak and the apparatus. So it's not, I'm seeing it as a dialogue in some ways. That the medium is not transparent. It's about it's like a meeting point with something I want to sort of bring of myself in relation to the medium that articulates it.